in his own hand, Hasan could not justify their incredible deficiency and could not slough the blame off upon his friend. Hasan had friends in Isfahan, where he immediately fled. There survives a record of what he said there, which sheds interesting light upon what was in his mind. One of these friends, Abu al-Fazal, notes that Hasan, after reciting the bitter tale of his downfall, shouted these words in a state of uncontrollable rage. Quote, "If I had just two devotees who would stand by me, then I would cause the downfall of that Turk and that peasant," unquote. Fazal concluded that Hasan had taken leave of his senses and tried to get him out of this ugly mood. Hasan took umbrage and insisted that he was working on a plan and that he would have his revenge. He set off for Egypt, there to mature his plans. Fazal was himself later to become a devotee of the assassin chief, and Hasan, 2 decades later, reminded him of that day in Isfahan. "Here I am at Alamut, master of all I survey and more. The Sultan and the peasant vizier are dead. Have I not kept my vow? Was I the madman you thought me to be? I found my 2 devotees who were necessary to my plans," unquote. Hasan himself takes up the story of how his fortunes fared after the flight from Persia. He had been brought up in the secret doctrines of Ismailism, the Arab branch of the mysteries, and recognized the possibilities of power inherent in such a system. He knew that in Cairo there was a powerful nucleus of the society, and if we are to believe the words of Fazal, he already had a plan whereby he could turn their followers into disciplined, devoted fanatics willing to die for a leader. What was this plan? Well, he had decided that it was not enough to promise paradise, fulfillment, eternal joy to people. He would actually show it to them. Show it in the form of an artificial paradise where houris played and fountains gushed, sweet-scented waters where every sensual wish was granted, amid beautiful flowers and gilded pavilions. And this, dear listeners, is what he eventually did. Hasan chose a hidden valley for the site of his paradise, described by Marco Polo, who passed this way in 1271. Quote, "In a beautiful valley enclosed between 2 lofty mountains, he had formed a luxurious garden stored with every delicious fruit and every fragrant shrub that could be procured. Palaces of various sizes and forms were erected in different parts of the grounds, ornamented with works of gold, with paintings, and with furniture of rich silks. By means of small conduits contained in these buildings, streams of wine, milk, honey, and some of pure water were seen to flow in every direction. The inhabitants of these places were elegant and beautiful damsels, accomplished in the arts of singing, playing upon all sorts of musical instruments, dancing, and especially those of dalliance and amorous allurement. Clothed in rich dresses, they were seen continually sporting and amusing themselves in the garden and pavilions, their female guardians being confined within doors and never allowed to appear. The object which the chief had in view in forming a garden of this fascinating kind was simply this: that Muhammad, having promised to those who should obey his will the enjoyments of paradise, where every species of sensual gratification should be found in the society of beautiful nymphs, he was desirous of it being understood by his followers that he also was a prophet and a compeer of Muhammad, and had the power of admitting to paradise such as he and he alone should choose to favor. In that order, and in order that none without his license should find their way into this delicious valley, he caused a strong and inexpugnable castle to be erected at the opening to it, through which the entry was by a secret passage, and thus the legend of Shambhala, or the paradise in the mountains, a valley of lush greenery, unending fruits, fair, beautiful maidens. Thus the legend began. Hassan began to attract young men from the surrounding countryside between the ages of 12 and 20, particularly those whom he marked out as possible material for the production of killers. And every day he held court, a reception at which he spoke of the delights of paradise, and at certain times he caused drops of a soporific nature to be administered to 10 or sometimes a dozen youths. And when half dead with sleep, drugged out of their minds, he had them conveyed to the several places and apartments of the garden. Upon awakening from this state of lethargy, their senses were struck by all the delightful objects, and each perceiving himself surrounded by lovely damsels, singing, playing, and attracting his regards by the most fascinating caresses, serving him also with delicious viands and exquisite wines, until, intoxicated with excess and enjoyment, amidst actual, real rivers of milk and wine, he believed himself assuredly in paradise, and felt an unwillingness to relinquish its delights. When 4 or 5 days had thus been passed, they were thrown once more into a state of somnolency, drugged and carried out of the garden. Then, upon being carried to his presence and questioned by him as to where they had been, their answer was, "In paradise, through the favor of your highness." And then, before the whole court, who listened to them with eager astonishment and curiosity, they gave a circumstantial account of the scenes to which they had been witnesses. The chief, thereupon addressing them, said, quote, "We have the assurance of our prophet that he who defends his Lord shall inherit paradise. And if you show yourselves to be devoted to the obedience of my orders, that happy lot awaits you," unquote. Now, suicide was at first attempted by some to be able to return to the paradise that they had just left, not knowing that it was an illusion. But the survivors were early told that only death in the obedience of Hassan's orders could give the key to paradise. In the 11th century, it was not only credulous Persian peasants who would have believed such things were true. Even among the more sophisticated people, the reality of the gardens and houris of paradise were completely accepted. True, a good many Sufis preached that the garden was allegorical, but that still left more than a few people who believed that they could trust the evidence of their senses. The Ancient Art of Imposture by Abdul Rahman of Damascus gives away another trick of Hassan's. You see, he had a deep, narrow pit sunk into the floor of his audience chamber. One of his disciples stood in this in such a way that his head and neck alone were visible above the floor. And around the neck was placed a circular dish in 2 pieces which fitted together, with a hole in the middle. And this gave the impression that there was a severed head on a metal plate standing on the floor. Now, in order to make the scene more plausible, if that is the word, Hassan had some fresh blood poured around the head on the plate. Then the recruits were brought in, the initiates. "Tell them," commanded the chief, "what thou hast seen." Then the disciple, appearing as a head on the plate, described the delights of paradise. Quote, "You have seen the head of a man who died, whom you all knew. I have reanimated him to speak with his own tongue," unquote. And then he would really sever treacherously the man's head in real earnest, and stuck for some time somewhere that the faithful would see it. And the effect of this conjuring trick, plus murder, increased the enthusiasm for martyrdom to the required degree, and gave him unbelievable control over his flock. There are many documented instances of the recklessness of the Fidayeen, devotees of the Ismailis, one witness being a Westerner who was treated a century later to a similar